All right. So we are in Skandha 5 of the Bhagavatam. We just finished discourse 19, so we're starting with Skandha 5, discourse 20. The whole rest of Skandha 5 until the end is all cosmology, all description of different lokas. So that's going to be everything we do today. And we'll see if we get through all of it. There's a lot of it. So discourse 20. So what we just had for the last several discourses was a description of Jambudvipa, the great continent of the rose apple is what it means. So discourse 20 is a description of the other 6 dvipas and the mountain range called Loka Loka. I'll explain what that means when we get to it. Sri Shuka resumed. Hereafter, the division of Plaksha and the other dvipas into varshas is going to be described with reference to their extent, distinctive character, and configuration. Even as Mount Meru is surrounded by Jambudvipa, this Jambudvipa is encircled by a salt ocean as wide as the dvipa itself. So the ring-shaped salt ocean is of approximately the same diameter as the diameter of Jambudvipa. And the salt ocean too is hemmed in by what bears the name of Plakshadvipa, which is twice as wide as the salt ocean, or 2 lakh yojanas wide, even as a moat may be enclosed by an outer garden. In other words, concentric circles. In Plakshadvipa, and so all of these structures, the measurements given for them overwhelmingly dwarf the whole Earth that we experience. These are vast regions extending through other lokas. What we would call other lokas. Technically, it's all part of Bhuloka, but it's a vastly wider extent of Bhuloka than what we can perceive. So in Plakshadvipa stands an effulgent Plaksha tree of the same dimensions as the great Jambu tree in Jambudvipa, which is responsible for the name of the Dvipa, and at the foot of which dwells the god of fire with 7 tongues. The first ruler of Plakshadvipa, Idmajihva, the 2nd son of Emperor Priyavrata, divided his Dvipa into 7 parts, and having entrusted these 7 varshas to his 7 sons, bearing the name of the 7 varshas. So in other words, the varshas were, the sons were named after the varshas, rather than vice versa. After that, he himself attained liberation by being united with the Supreme Spirit. These 7 varshas are called Shiva, Yavasa, Subhadra, Shanta, Kshema, Amrata, and Abhaya. The well-known mountains and rivers in those varshas are severally 7 only. So there's 1 famous mountain and 1 famous river in each. Manikuta, Vajrakuta, Indrasena, Jyotishman, Suparna, Hiranyashtiva, and Meghamala are the principal mountains forming the boundaries of the varshas. Those have, you can kind of infer things about them from their name, like named after jewels or diamonds, or the armies of Indra or the Devas, or Suparna means inhabited by huge bird deities like Garuda. Of course, Shanta, peaceful, and so on. Meghamala being like garlanded with clouds. The principal rivers are called Aruna, Nrumna, Angirasi, Savitri, Suprabhata, Ratambhara, and Satyambhara. The 4 classes of people who live there, bearing the title of Hansa, Patanga, Urdhvayana, and Satyanga, respectively, instead of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, like we have in Bharatavarsha in Jambudvipa, are able to shake off rajas and tamas by bathing in the water of these 7 holy rivers. They live to an age of 1,000 years, possess a form similar to that of the gods, free from fatigue or perspiration, etc., bear children like the gods, which typically means that they don't go through the same lengthy process of pregnancy and physical childbirth as humans here do, and worship the Lord, the soul of the universe, in the form of the sun god, the gateway to heaven and the veritable embodiment of the 3 Vedas, through the rituals taught in the 3 Vedas. So evidently they don't have the Atharva Veda in Plakshadvipa. And their essential prayer is, we resort to the sun god, who is a manifestation of the most ancient Lord Vishnu and the very soul of Satya, Rita, the Veda, as well as of the good and evil. In the 5 dvipas, commencing from the Plaksha Dvipa, long life, soundness, and potency of the Indriyas, strength of mind and bodily vigor, intellectual acumen and bravery, are the natural endowment of all men without distinction. So there's variations in those things, certainly as we observe in Jambudvipa and also in Plakshadvipa, but in the 7 further out than that, essentially perfection of body and sharpness, soundness of mind is pretty much universal among the populations. So Plakshadvipa is surrounded by an ocean of sugarcane juice, equal in width to the dvipa itself. And even as it is so surrounded, so does Shalmali Dvipa, which is double in width, shine as enclosed by an equally wide ocean of wine. It is a well-known fact that in that dvipa, in Shalmali Dvipa, indeed there is a Shalmali tree, a silk cotton tree, of the same dimensions as the Plaksha tree, meaning a huge otherworldly tree, many times taller than our whole Earth planet, on which the learned proclaim the existence of the abode of the glorious Garuda, who glorifies the Lord by means of Vedic hymns. And this tree is considered as responsible for the name of the Dvipa. The first ruler of that Dvipa, King Yajnabahu, the 3rd son of Priyavrata, divided among his 7 sons the 7 varshas of that Dvipa, bearing the name of the princes, Surochana, Saumanasya, Ramanaka, Devavarsha, Paribhadra, Apyayana, and Avijñata. So there's 2 Ramanakas that have been described in the last couple of discourses, just to avoid confusion between the 2. There is the Ramanaka island off the coast of Jambudvipa, and now separately there's another place called Ramanaka, which is one of the varshas of Shalmali Dvipa. In those varshas, the well-known mountains demarcating the different varshas and rivers are 7. So the mountains are the Svarasa, Shatashranga, Vamadeva, Kunda, Mukunda, Pushpavrasha, and Sahasrasruti. And the 7 rivers are the Anumati, Senivali, Sarasvati, Kuhu, Rajani, Nanda, and Raka. The 4 classes of people of those varshas, known by the names of Srutadhara, Viryadhara, Vasundhara, and Ishandhara, worship with Vedic hymns the Lord who is the soul of the universe in the form of the moon god, who is Veda personified, with the prayer, may the moon god, who during the dark and bright fortnights distributes by his rays nourishment in the shape of nectar to the Pitris and the Devas, as well as to all created beings, be our ruler on all sides. There is a footnote here explaining a little bit more about what this reference is. It is believed that the orb of the moon is constituted of nectar, the nourishment of the Devas and the Pitris, which it scatters by its rays all the 30 days of a month. It's not actually in the Vedas said that the orb of the moon is made of nectar. It's said that it's washed in it, like the nectar flows over it. The vegetable kingdom, the natural food of earthly creatures, including humans, is also believed to derive its nutritive properties, succulence, and savor from the moonbeams, specifically from the subtle quality of soma from the moon that nourishes plants. It is in this sense that the moon god is declared in the above verse as distributing food to all created beings. Similarly, beyond the ocean of wine and twice as large, the Kushadvipa, which, like the Shalmali Dvipa, is encircled by an equally wide ocean of clarified butter or liquid ghee. In that Dvipa, Kushadvipa, there is a clump of kusha grass brought into existence by the Lord, which is responsible for the name of the Dvipa, and which, like another flaming fire, illuminates the quarters by the effulgence of its shoots. So clearly a brightly glowing clump of kusha grass. The first ruler of Kushadvipa, O Parikshit, King Hiranyareta by name, the fourth son of Priyavrata, divided his Dvipa in due proportion among his 7 sons, Vasu, Vasudana, Dhrutaruchi, Nabhigupta, Stutyavrata, Vivikta, and Vamadeva, and himself took to religious austerities. In their varshas, the well-known mountains forming their boundaries and rivers are 7. The 7 mountains are the Chakra, Chatushringa, Kapila, Chitrakuta, not to be confused with the Chitrakuta mountain in India in Jambudvipa, Devanika, Urdhvaroma, and Dravina, and the 7 rivers are the Rasakulya, Madhukulya, Mitravinda, Srutavinda, Devagarbha, Ghritatyuta, and Mantramala. Purified by their waters, the inhabitants of Kushadvipa, enjoying the title of Kushala, Kovida, Abhiyukta, and Kulaka, worship the Lord manifested as the god of fire by means of their proficiency in rituals, with the prayer, "You are the carrier of oblations to Bhagavan Narayana," to Bhagavan Narayana, the transcendent Brahman himself, O God of fire, by means of the worship to the gods, who are limbs of that supreme person, propitiate Srihari. Likewise, beyond the ocean of ghee lies the Kroncha Dvipa, twice as wide and surrounded by an ocean of milk of the same width as itself, even as the Kushadvipa is enclosed by the ocean of ghee. There, on Kroncha Dvipa, stands the king of mountains, Kroncha by name, which is responsible for the name of this Dvipa. So Kroncha literally means it's a bird, the Kroncha bird. It is, it's called a curlew in English. It's like a small coastal bird. It's common in India. But in this case, it's a mountain named after it. So it had its ledges and arbors riven and destroyed by the weapon of Guha, or Skanda, or Kartikeya Deva. The mountain became fearless, sprayed by the ocean of milk and protected on all sides by the glorious Varuna Deva. Its ruler, the 5th son of Priyavrata, Ghritarashta by name, who lived in that Dvipa of his own share, carved out 7 varshas, and having installed his 7 heirs in those varshas, which were named after his sons as their rulers, himself resorted to the lotus feet of Lord Sri Hari of most auspicious renown, his own inner self, enlightened as he was. The sons of Ghritarashta were named Ama, Madhuruha, Meghaprashta, Sudhama, Bhrajishta, Lohitarna, and Vanaspati. The well-known mountains of their varshas are 7: Shukla, Vardhamana, Bhojana, Upabarhena, Nanda, Nandana, and Sarvatobhadra. And the rivers also are 7: Abhaya, Amrataugha, Aryaka, Tirtavati, Vrittirupavati, Pavitravati, and Shukla. Using the sacred and purifying water of these rivers, the 4 classes of the people of these varshas, bearing the title of Purusha, Rishabha, Dravina, and Devaka, wait upon the deity in the form of water, with the hollow of their joined palms full of water. With the prayer, O water, You are endowed with the energy of God, consecrating the three worlds, capable of wiping out sins by your very nature. Purify our bodies as we touch you. So evidently from their prayer, their spiritual practice is very focused on purity specifically, as compared to the people of the other dvipas. Likewise, situated beyond the ocean of milk and round about it is the Shaka Dvipa, with a width of 32 lakh yojanas. That is 25,600,000 miles, and enclosed by an equally wide ocean of liquid curds, or yogurt. In that dvipa stands a tree bearing the appellation of Shaka, which is responsible for the name of the dvipa, and whose most fragrant odor, they say, perfumes the entire dvipa. That's interesting, given that the dvipa is a ring, and yet it does not purify across what's in the middle of the ring. Evidently implying some kind of local laws of nature that distribute it through the ring of the dvipa, but not filling in the middle. The ruler of that dvipa, the first ruler of that dvipa, was the sixth son of Priyavrata, Medhatiti by name. He too carved out 7 varshas that were named after his sons, and having installed there as rulers his sons, bearing the names of Purojava, Manojava, Pavamana, Dhumranika, Chitrarepa, Bahurupa, and Vishvadhara, himself entered a forest suitable for religious austerities, his mind given to Lord Ananta, or Lord Sheshanada was his Ishta. The mountains forming the boundaries of these varshas, as well as the rivers of these varshas, are 7. The mountains are the Ishana, Urusringa, Balabhadra, Shatakesara, Sahasrasrota, Devapala, and Mahanasa. And the 7 rivers are the Anagha, Ayurdha, Ubhayasprashti, Aparajita, Panchapadi, Sahasrasruti, and Nijadhriti. The 4 classes of the people of those varshas, severally bearing the title of Ratavrata, Satyavrata, Danavrata, and Anuvrata, worship the Lord in the form of the wind god through supreme concentration of mind, having shaken off rajas and tamas by means of pranayama, with the prayer, may that Lord, the very inner controller, under whose sway this visible universe exists, and who, having entered animate beings, sustains them by his functions of inhalation, exhalation, and so on, protect us. Interestingly, just a note here about this particular dvipa, Shaka dvipa. I have met some Australian Hindus who believe that there's a deep spiritual connection between Australia and Shaka dvipa. Not that they identify it, obviously it's not a vast ring continent, but they identify it in a similar way to India with Bharatavarsha as a greater structure in the other lokas. And they've even drawn connections between the names of some of these mountains and holy mountains of the Australian Aboriginal people, and so on. It's a big part of the local traditions of Hindus living in Australia. Even so, extending beyond the ocean of fluid curds and encircling it lies the Pushkara Dvipa, double in width as compared to it, and surrounded on the other side by an equally wide ocean of fresh water. In that dvipa stands a gigantic lotus with hundreds of millions of gold petals, bright as the flames of a blazing fire, which is intended to be the seat of the glorious Brahma. In the middle of that dvipa rises only one mountain range, named Manasotara, which forms the boundary of the inner and outer varshas. And that's interesting, in that it implies that within this land of Pushkara Dvipa, there are inner varshas that are within the one mountain range, and then the outer varshas or outer regions which are outside the one mountain range, and possesses a height as well as a width of 10,000 yojanas, or 80,000 miles. On this mountain stand in the 4 quarters the 4 cities of Indra, and other guardians of the world. Oh, I'm sorry. that I realized I actually do know what this means, and no, it's not varshas within or without the mountain range exactly. It rings the whole disk of Bhumandala around the outside. So yes, on this mountain Manasotara, which is like a rim around the entire disk plane of Bhumandala, stand the cities of the Lokapalas, the city of Indra in the east, of Yama in the south, of Varuna in the west, and of Soma in the north. And over it revolves the wheel in the form of a year of the sun god's chariot, going round Mount Meru in the space of a day and a night of the gods, which correspond to the northern and southern courses of the sun. So that the day of the Devas is from the winter solstice to the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere of our Earth, and from the summer solstice to the winter solstice is the night of the Devas. The ruler of the aforementioned Dvipa, Pushkara Dvipa, was the seventh son of Priyavrata, Vitihotra by name. Having appointed his two sons, Ramanaka and Dhataki by name, as the rulers of the two Varshas comprised in his Dvipa, he himself took solely to the service of the Lord like his elder brothers. The people of these two Varshas worship the Lord in the form of Brahma the Creator, through rituals leading to Brahma Loka and other such rewards, and repeat the following prayer. Hail to that glorious yet tranquil form, which is attained through acts, and by resorting to which Brahma can be known, which men worship, which has the one supreme reality for its goal, and is one without a second. The sage Sri Shuka went on. Beyond that ocean of fresh water stands in the form of a ring the mountain range called Lokaloka, which constitutes the dividing line between the regions lighted and those not so lighted. In other words, by the light of the sun. A stretch of land as wide as that lying between the Manasotara and Meru mountains extends on the other side of the ocean of fresh water. Beyond that, there is another land with a surface of gold and like a sheet of mirror. Anything dropped there is on no account to be found again, because it is changed into gold and assimilated with the surface. Hence, it is shunned by all life. The mountain range referred to is rightly called Lokaloka, inasmuch as Loka, the region lighted by the sun, and Aloka, which is in darkness, are clearly defined by it, standing as it does between them. Literally, Lokaloka means essentially world, not world mountain, the mountain that defines the borders of the world. That mountain has been placed by the Almighty beyond the three worlds, as a boundary extending on all sides, and it is so high and extensive that the rays of the multitudes of heavenly bodies from the sun up to the pole star, enveloping as they do the three worlds on this side, are never able to reach the other side. So in other words, we're essentially calling this structure a mountain by means of kind of poetic analogy, but what it actually is the edge of the universe, essentially. Thus far has been reckoned to be the disposition of the terrestrial world by the learned, with reference to the extent, distinctive character, and configuration. As for the region extending from Mount Sumeru to the aforesaid Lokaloka mountain, it covers a quarter of the entire diameter of the terrestrial globe, which is calculated to be 50 crore yojanas, or 4 billion miles. So at this point, we're talking about a structure that's easily on the scale of what in our modern understanding we would call our entire solar system. Beyond that mountain live the great elephants, Rishabha, Pushkarachuda, Vamana, and Aparajita by name, that have been posted in the four quarters by the self-born Brahma, the adored of the whole universe, and are responsible for maintaining the entire globe. By way of, so these are essentially great gods, great elephant gods, who are guardians of the world. By way of augmenting the various powers of those elephants, as well as of the Lokapalas, who are part manifestations of the Lord's own glory, and for the welfare of all the worlds, the Almighty Lord, the supremely exalted person, the possessor of the highest glory, the inner controller, dwells on all sides of this great mountain, surrounded by his foremost attendants, Vishvaksena and others. In manifesting his divine form characterized by virtue, omniscience, dispassion, omnipotence, and other divine attributes, as well as by the 8 superhuman powers or siddhis, the Ashta Siddhis, and distinguished by his stout arms, adorned with his own weapons. What I mean is that the Lord has assumed the aforesaid form for the maintenance of the career of the various worlds evolved by his own Yoga Maya. The extent of Aloka, the region of the outer darkness, which stretches on the other side of the Loka mountain, has been explained by the extent of the area falling on this side. In other words, it's equal, that long again. Beyond Aloka, the learned declare the sacred region, which can be traversed only by masters of yoga. The sun is located in the middle of the egg, which corresponds to the center of space lying between the upper and lower shells of the cosmic egg. So the cosmic egg seems here to correspond to the boundaries of our solar system. The space between the sun and the cosmic egg is 25 crore yojanas, or 2 billion miles. So the cosmic egg is essentially being defined as a sphere 4 billion miles wide, with our centered on our sun. Because the sun god appeared in this lifeless egg, the appellation of Martanda has been applied to him ever since. Martanda literally means dead egg. He is also called Hiranyagarbha, inasmuch as he represents the embryo within the golden egg. By the sun, indeed, are divided the quarters, the heaven, the celestial region, the earth, and other such distinctions, the worlds of enjoyment and supreme bliss, the infernal regions or the narakas. Of gods and human beings, as well as of the subhuman creatures, of reptiles and plants, nay, of all species of living beings, the sun god is the very self, as well as the deity presiding over their eyesight. Thus ends the 20th discourse, delineating the relative position, extent, and distinctive character of the oceans and varshas as a part of the description of the terrestrial world, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 21, a description of the stellar sphere, as well as of the chariot of the sun god and his entourage. Sri Shuka began again. To this extent alone has the disposition of the terrestrial globe been described with reference to the extent and distinctive character of its parts. By this, the knowers of the subject describe the extent of the heavenly sphere as well, even as by referring to the 2 halves of peas and other pulses. In other words, by saying that if it forms a sphere, then if you know 1/2, you can infer the dimensions of the other half. Between the 2, the heaven and the earth, intervenes the sky or the aerial region, referred to as Bhuvaraloka, which is joined both to heaven and earth. In other words, the atmosphere. Placed at the center of the sky, the glorious sun, the lord of the luminaries, warms by its heat and illuminates by its light the 3 worlds. By slow, swift, and regulated marches, known by the names of Uttarayana, which is the northerly march from the equator to the summer solstice and back to the equator, Dakshinayana, the southerly march from the equator to the winter solstice and back to the equator, and the Vaishuvata, the march across the equator from equinox to equinox, and rising higher, going down, and taking a mean position whenever and wherever such positions are inevitable, based on the astrophysics of the solar system. The sun, while passing through the signs of the zodiac, from Makara onwards, lengthens the days while shortening the nights, and vice versa, and brings their duration on a par at the equinoxes. When the sun traverses the signs of Mesha and Tula, the days and nights are of equal length. And when it traverses the 5 suns from Vrishabha onwards, in other words, from Vrishabha, Mituna, Karkata, Singha, and Kanya, the days become longer and longer while the nights become shorter by nearly half an hour every month. When the sun traverses the 5 signs from Vrishchika onwards, Vrishchika, Dhanush, Makara, Kumbha, and Meena, the days become shorter and the nights longer. The days grow in length till the sun takes to the southward course, and nights become longer and longer until it takes a northward turn. The learned declare the distance covered by the revolution of the sun on the top of the Manasotara mountain, as described heretofore, to be 9 crore and 51 lakh yojanas, and mention the existence on that mountain of the city of Indra, presiding over the eastern quarter, the city named Devadhani, the city of Yama in the south, called Sanyamani, the city of Varuna in the west, Nimlochani by name, and the city of Soma, the moon god, in the northern quarter, known as Vibhavari, to the east, southwest, and north, respectively, of Mount Meru. When the sun makes its way into these cities at particular periods, there are on the 4 sides of Mount Meru sunrise, midday, sunset, and midnight, respectively, which serve as occasions for activity and suspensions of activity on the part of living beings. So this is very clearly describing a whole structure of the day and the night from the perspective of the Devas, very different from what we experience here on Earth, such that this could not possibly have been mistaken to be a description of day and night here on Earth. It's referring to a day being an entire year long for us. We're describing a day of the Devas. It also describes a world in which the sun never rises overhead. It would be like an equinox north of the Arctic Circle or in Antarctica, where the sun constantly rides the rim of the horizon and never really rises or sets, just goes behind the great mountain structures. So this is describing a world that, if you were in it, would look totally different from our world, describing it from the perspective of the days and nights of the Devas. For those dwelling on Meru, the sun ever shines as at midday. And though keeping Meru on its left, it appears to keep the Meru on its right. This is explained as because it's actually moving in an easterly direction with its face turned toward the lunar mansions, but it appears to move in a westerly direction because the opposite movement of the entire stellar sphere, going from east to west, which it describes as being pushed by the wind called the pravaha, which is always blowing with Meru on its right. So referring this whole structure has actually been described by commentators on the Bhagavatam. It makes a great deal of mathematical and astronomical sense if Bhumandala is understood to be the sphere of the ecliptic, which is the flat plane that you can calculate in the solar system of the apparent orbit of the sun around the Earth, by which I mean, obviously, we know that the Earth orbits the sun. But if you draw the circle in space of the circle that the sun describes around the Earth from our perspective, it describes a plane called the ecliptic, which corresponds mathematically precisely to the structure of Bhumandala described in the Puranas, like here, and also in Matsya Purana and Vishnu Purana. It corresponds almost precisely in the measurement of the diameter of the miles. It is true that the sun rides around the rim of the edge of that disk from our mathematical perspective. And a lot of other measurements also make a great deal of sense with that understanding of how Bhumandala relates to the solar system. It is a well-known fact that the sun sets just on the opposite side of the point where it rises, and it sends the world to deep sleep just opposite to the place where it torments people so as to make them drip with perspiration. They who clearly see it continually no longer perceive it when it has gone to the other side, which, that is to say, when you continually observe the sun from sunrise to sunset, when it's on the other side, there's night on this side, of course, as we know. When the sun proceeds from the city of Indra to the city of Yama, from the east to the south, it traverses in the course of 15 ghatikas, or 6 hours, a distance of 2.25 crore, 12.5 lakh, and slightly more yojanas, or 1/4 of its total orbit. In the same way, it travels from the city of Yama to the city of Varuna, and thence to the city of Soma, and back to the city of Indra, all of which are equidistant from each other. So also other planets or other astral bodies, such as the moon, along with the lunar mansions, rise as well as set together in the stellar sphere. Thus covering a distance of 34 lakh and 800 yojanas in the course of 2 ghatikas, which is 48 minutes, the chariot of the sun god, which represents the 3 Vedas, continues to travel through the 4 cities. The wise speak of this chariot as having one of its wheels in the shape of a year with 12 spokes in the form of the 12 months, a rim with 6 segments in the form of the 6 seasons. In India, the ancient model is of 6 seasons rather than 4. It's the 4 commonly known seasons in the West of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. But there's a cool season between winter and spring, and then the monsoon season between summer and autumn. And a hub with 3 pieces joined together in the shape of the 3 parts of the 4 months each. Its axle tree, continuing the chariot metaphor, is fixed at one end to the top of Mount Meru as the circle of the revolving wheel, and has its other end placed over the Manasotara mountain. Fixed through and rotating on this, like the wheel of an oil press, the wheel of the chariot of the sun god revolves over the Manasotara mountain. There is a second axle tree, measuring 1/4 the length of the first, with its lower end joined to the aforesaid axle like the axle of an oil press, and its upper end fastened to the pole star. The interior of the chariot is 36 lakh yojanas long and a quarter of that in breadth. The yoke of the chariot of the sun god is of the same extent, joined to this by Aruna, the god Aruna, the charioteer, 7 horses, severally bearing the names of the Chandahas, Gayatri, Brahati, Ushnik, Jagati, Trashtub, Anushtub, and Pankti, carrying the sun god. Charged with the role of a charioteer, they say, sits Aruna in front of the sun god, but with his face turned towards the west. Even so, entrusted with uttering his praises in front of him, 60,000 sages, the Valakilyas, equal in size to the 4-part of a thumb, so they're described as being tiny, extol the sun god in a chorus. Similarly, other rishis, Gandharvas, Apsaras, Nagas, Yakshas, Yatodhanas, and Devas, 14 taken singly and forming seven groups when taken in pairs, each pair consisting of 2 individuals of the same species. So there's 2 rishis, 2 Gandharvas, 2 Apsaras, 2 Nagas, 2 Yakshas, 2 Yatodhanas, and 2 Devas, bearing diverse names, wait upon the Lord, the spirit in the form of the sun god, called by different names through different services and in distinct batches every month. These different functions discharged by these 7 pairs are described in the Vishnu Purana as that the rishis extol Surya Deva through hymns of praise, the Gandharvas sing before him, the Apsaras dance in front of him, and then follow the Yatodhanis, also doing a type of dance. The Nagas assist with drawing the chariot, the Yakshas manage the reins, and the tiny Valyakilya sages sit in the chariot surrounding him and constantly praising him like a choir. The circumference of the terrestrial globe in the heart of the outermost Dvipa is 9 crore and 51 lakh yojanas. Of this, the sun covers 2,002 yojanas in a moment. Thus ends the 21st discourse, entitled A Description of the Stellar Sphere, as well as of the chariot of the sun god and his entourage, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. There are many whole book-length commentaries on the Bhagavatam and on drawing from other Puranas as well, from the Vishnu Purana and from the Matsya Purana, which also describe all this. Going into all the mathematics and interpretations of this huge, complex structure of the two axles of the wheel yoked to Meru and to the pole star, and going into all the measurements and correlating that with observed astronomy and so on. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages of commentary written explaining all of this. It's very complex and mostly mathematical. Discourse 22. The relative position of the planets and their movements. So the Raja Parikshit spoke up at this point and said, "How are we to understand what your glorious self has stated with respect to that glorious sun, that while appearing to revolve around Mount Meru and the pole star with both these on its right, it actually moves facing the lunar mansions with Meru on its left?" So Parikshit didn't understand that, which makes sense. That's a very mysterious thing to say. The sage clearly said, "As the course of ants, etc., crawling on a potter's wheel which is rotating, and thus the ants are revolving with it, is indeed different from the course of the wheel itself, as evidenced by the fact that the ants or so on are observed in different parts of the wheel, even while it is in motion. So the course of the sun and other planets, which are subject to the wheel of time, symbolized by the constellations and the signs of the zodiac, and revolve with it even as the wheel in the form of constellations revolves round the pole star and Mount Meru, is certainly different, as is clear from the fact that the sun and other planets are observed as conjoined with different constellations and at different signs of the zodiac." In other words, what he's describing is that the sun and the planets, while not separate from the motion of the galaxy, that the motions of the galaxy include moving our solar system, the orbits of the planets are also observably distinct from the background motion of the stars. It is no other than the glorious Lord Narayana, the most ancient person himself, who is critically inquired into by the Vedas as well as by the wise, that for the welfare of living beings splits up his body, the theme of the three Vedas, which is responsible for the right performance of rituals, into 12 parts, the 12 months, and manifests in the 6 seasons, spring, etc., the characteristics of each season, so as to provide the jivas with the means of reaping the fruits of their past actions. Devoutly worshipping in this world the aforesaid Lord in the form of Indra and the other devas of the Vedas, through rituals high and low prescribed in the three Vedas, and through the elaborate system of yoga, men following the path chalked out for the various varnas and ashramas easily and duly attain the blessings that result from those practices. Now, entering the wheel of time existing in the firmament between heaven and earth, the same Lord who is the soul of all living beings passes through 12 months, the parts of a year, known by the names of the signs of the zodiac, Mesha, Vrusha, and so on. The learned declare that a month is equivalent to 2 fortnights. In other words, the waning moon and the waxing moon. A day and a night, and the period taken in traversing 2 constellations and a quarter. And the fraction of a year in which he covers the 6, so this describes a solar month. With precise mathematical accuracy. And the fraction of a year in which he, the sun god, covers a 6th part of his orbit is called a ritu, or a season. And again, they refer to the time in which he traverses 1/2 of his passage to the heavens as an ayana, a half year. And further, the learned speak of the time in which the same sun traverses the whole extent of the sky, bounded by the heavenly sphere on one side and the terrestrial sphere on the other, along with these 2 spheres in slow, rapid, and moderate marches, as a samvatsara, parivatsara, idavatsara, anuvatsara, or vatsara, the 5 different types of year, depending on whether you're counting a solar year or a lunar year or so on. Similarly, the moon, which is observed at a height of a lakh yojanas beyond the orb of the sun. Now, let me explain that. Of course, from a modern perspective, measuring from our Earth to the moon to the sun, we know that the moon is overwhelmingly closer to us than the sun is. Whereas the Bhagavatam here is saying that the moon is much further from us than the sun. This makes perfect sense, and the math works out very well. If you understand that we're talking not about the Earth of our experience, but about the Bhumandala structure with this vastly greater measurement corresponding to the ecliptic, in which the sun is right on the ecliptic, as it describes it, riding on the rim of the Manasotara mountain. Whereas the moon, we're measuring not the distance from the Earth that we experience, we're measuring the distance from the plane of the ecliptic, in which the moon is further, considerably further than the sun. So the moon, which is observed as a height of a lakh yojanas beyond the orb of the sun from the plane of Bhumandala, and which moves faster than the sun relative to the plane and leads all the other constellations, completes in the course of a month the circuit made by the sun in a whole year, traverses in 2¼ days the distance covered by the sun in a month, and the distance covered in a fortnight by the sun in the course of a day, referring to their relative orbital periods. Determining by its gradually growing and declining splendor, associated with its first and second half months, the waning and the waxing, the day and night of the Devas and the Pitris respectively, the moon, which is the very life of all the species of living beings as well as their life giver, passes through each constellation in the course of 30 muhurtas, or 24 hours, a solar day. It is this glorious being appearing in the form of the moon, with its orb consisting of 16 parts or digits, the deity presiding over the mind, the food of all living beings, and the very embodiment of nectar, who, being by his very nature the nourisher of the life of the Devas and the Pitris, human beings and spirits, beasts and birds, reptiles and plants, is one with all, so declare the wise. At the height of 3 lakh yojanas beyond the moon, again, measuring perpendicular distance from the plane of Bhumandala. None of these measurements are from the spherical Earth planet that we experience. Are placed the 28 lunar mansions, the nakshatras. There's normally 27. There is a 28th that doesn't have a character and all the other attributes of a nakshatra, but is kind of like the equivalent of like a leap month to make the stellar year correspond to the solar year. So that's the same way there's a leap month in the Vedic lunar calendar of Adhika Masa or Purushottama Masa. So that's why there's sometimes a reference to 28 nakshatras, but usually 27. The 28 lunar mansions inclusive of Abhijit, Abhijit being the leap nakshatra. There's a footnote giving all the names of the nakshatras, but I don't think we have to read through that. They revolve with the Meru on their right alone, fixed as they are to the wheel of time by God, by which it means fixed to the background rotation of the stellar galaxy, not with separate orbits within our solar system like planets. At a height of 2 lakh yojanas beyond them is observed Ushana, the planet we call Venus, which traverses the heavens in rapid, slow, and moderate marches like the sun, going before, in the rear, and keeping pace with the sun. Bringing showers almost invariably, it is ever propitious to living beings, and by its flitting is concluded to be neutralizing the influences of grahas obstructing rainfall. This is some references to some principles of Jyotish. By describing Ushana, Buddha too stands described. Oh, Radha, just to mention that the influence of Ushana, the influence of Venus, it refers to being a propitious planet to living beings, and by its interaction with certain nakshatras neutralizes the influence of grahas obstructing rainfall. This is in book 5, chapter 22, that it touches a little bit on Jyotish. Specifically Jyotish for the purpose of Jyotish. A lot of the way that Jyotish was used in pre-modern times was less about doing the charts of humans. That kind of individual focus is more of a modern emphasis. Like, it certainly existed in the old Jyotish Shastras, but a lot of it was predicting rainfall and Jyotish applied to agriculture and concerns like that, whereas modern Jyotishis talk much more about individual humans. So by describing Ushana, Buddha too stands described, Buddha, or Mercury, the Graha, observed at a height of 2 lakh yojanas beyond Venus, beyond Ushana, again relative to the plane of Bhumandala. Buddha, an offspring of the moon, referring to Buddha Deva being the son of Soma Deva, is generally beneficent. When it outstrips the sun in a chart, it forebodes storm, a cloudy weather almost throughout that period, drought, and other unwelcome conditions. Beyond Buddha, Angaraka too, or Mars, is observed at a height of 2 lakh yojanas. It passes through the 12 signs of the zodiac at a rate of 1 in 3 fortnights, unless it takes a retrograde course, and it is an inauspicious graha, often portending evil. Placed at a height of 2 lakh yojanas beyond Angaraka, the glorious Brahaspati passes through 1 sign of the zodiac in a whole year, unless it takes a retrograde course. It is generally propitious to the Brahmana race. Observed at a height of 2 lakh yojanas beyond Brahaspati, and tarrying in each sign of the zodiac for 30 months, or 2.5 years, the planet Shanaishchara passes through all in exactly the same number of years, all the 12 signs, and is indeed mostly a source of anxiety to all. At a height of 11 lakh yojanas beyond Shanaishchara are observed the Saptarishis, the 7 stars of the Big Bear, or Ursa Major, that move clockwise round what they call the highest abode of Lord Vishnu, the pole star, Dhruvaloka, contemplating the good of all living beings. Thus ends the 22nd discourse, forming a part of an account of the stellar sphere in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahamsa Samhita. And I think we should do the next one because it's pretty short and it is very much in the same subject as this one. Discourse 23, the disposition of the stellar sphere represented in the form of a dolphin. Sri Shuka continued. Now at a height of 13 lakh yojanas beyond the Great Bear lies what they call the highest abode of Lord Vishnu, where indeed resides the great devotee of the Lord, Dhruva son of Uttanapada, who is being circumambulated clockwise with great reverence even to this day by Agni, Indra, Kashyapa Prajapati, and Dharma the Deva, all moving synchronously in the form of stars, and who is the mainstay of those who live at the time of Pralaya, when the 3 worlds perish. In other words, that beings who survive the Pralaya take refuge in Dhruvaloka until 3 loka are created again by Brahma. His glory has already been described in this book. Indeed, he shines eternally, fixed as he is by God, like a post holding together all the multitudes of luminaries, including planets and lunar mansions that are being made to revolve by the ever-vigilant planets and lunar mansions, being grahas and nakshatras, that are being made to revolve by the ever-vigilant and all-powerful time of incomprehensible speed. Just as oxen trampling corn in order to thresh it, while tied to a post in the middle of a threshing floor, walk round in their respective spheres in 3 circles, gradually receding further from the post as you lengthen the rope so that they get the different sections of barley, corn, or rice, or whatever other crop you're having them thresh. So the hosts of luminaries, including the grahas, fastened as they are to the aforesaid wheel of time, either in the inner circle or in the outer one, and propelled by the wind called Pravaha, revolve round the pole star as the pivot till the end of a kalpa in 3 courses. In other words, the northward course, the southward course, or the equatorial course. As clouds and birds, such as the hawk, move about in the sky, suspended in the air and helped by their destiny, so the hosts of luminaries, which are no other than particular jivas, appearing in the form of stars or planets or so on, brought into existence by the union of matter and spirit, and reaping the fruit yielded by their actions, do not fall. Some people declare the stellar sphere as capable of being meditated upon through deep concentration of mind as a form of Lord Vasudeva in the shape of a dolphin, a form of Vasudeva in the shape of a dolphin made of stars. At the end of the tail of this dolphin, whose body lies coiled with its head downwards, is allocated the pole star. At its tail, below the end, are located one after another the 4 stars representing the Prajapati Kashyapa, the star of Agni, the star of Indra, and the star of Dharma. At the root of its tail, the stars representing the gods Dhata and Vidhata, 2 devas of the Rig Veda. At the hip, the 7 stars of the Saptarishis. On the right side of the dolphin, whose body lies coiled from left to right, they locate the 14 constellations that mark the northern course from Abhijit to Panarvasu, and the other 14 of the southern course from Pushya to Uttarashadha on the left side. As on both sides of a dolphin whose body is disposed in concentric rings, the parts are equally divided. At its back is placed the group of constellations known by the name of Ajaviti, consisting of Mula, Purvashadha, and Uttarashadha. And at its belly, the Milky Way. One should locate Punarvasu and Pushya at the right and left loins, Ardra and Ashlesha at the right and left hind legs. Evidently, this is somewhat different from an earthly dolphin, given that it has legs. Abhijit and Uttarashadha at the right and left nostrils, Sravana and Purvashadha at the right and left eyes, Dhanishta and Mula at the right and left ears, respectively, and the 8 constellations from Magha onwards, marking the southern course, at the ribs on the left side, and even so, one should place the 8 marking the northern course, Mriga Shirsha, and so on, at the ribs on the right side in the reverse order, counting from Purva Bhadrapada back to Mriga Shirsha, and locate the remaining 2 nakshatras, Shatabhisha and Jyeshta, at the right and left shoulders. At the upper jaw should be placed the star representing the sage Agasti or Agastya, and the star of Yama at the lower jaw. The Graha Angaraka at the mouth, Shanaishchara at the penis, Brahaspati at the hump, the sun at the chest, the star representing the divine sage, the avatar Narayana at the heart, the moon in the mind, Ushana or Shukra at the navel, the 2 stars of the twin gods, the Ashwini Kumaras at the breasts, or as the 2 nipples, Buddha in the outgoing and incoming breaths, Rahu at the neck, and the Ketus all over the body as streaming tailed comets, and all the hosts of stars in the hair of its body. And actually fixing one's gaze on this very form of Lord Vishnu, the star dolphin representing all the gods, in the evening from day to day, one should wait with a concentrated mind upon the same, with the following prayer silently, so not said out loud, but thought. Hail to the Supreme Person, the wheel of time, the backbone of the luminaries, the ruler of all the gods. Thus do we meditate on him. The form of Lord Vishnu, the ruler of all the gods, consisting of the grahas, nakshatras, and the stars, wipes out the sins of those who repeat the foregoing prayer thrice in the morning and evening and at noon every day at the Trikala Sandhya times. But most important is the evening. The sin committed in the immediate past by him, only the immediate past, not in the further past, by him who bows to or even thinks of this form 3 times a day at the Trikala Sandhya, disappears at once. Thus ends the 23rd discourse, entitled The Disposition of the Stellar Sphere, represented in the form of the dolphin, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. I think it might make sense to stop there. Next, we get into Rahu and Ketu, and we start getting into descriptions of some other lokas. So we're done with the stars. So I think that makes sense as a stopping point. Next week, we will definitely finish the 5th skandha and probably start in on the 6th. So yes, let me stop the recording here. Thank you all for coming.